Well, joining me now for more on a possible Greek exit is the global affairs analyst Marco Vicenzino. Marco, just how significant is this admission by the Greek central bank that it could actually leave the EU?
It's an enormous statement, and it's a public relations setback for the Tsipras government, because in recent weeks, the Prime Minister, Tsipras, is basically what we could call an equivalent of a call to arms, basically trying to build his domestic support in the country to show not only to inside, to all Greeks, but to the outside world that Greeks are united behind him. He has their mandate. And the fact that the central bank governor has come out making these statements is a setback for him. And also there's a fact that, although the central bank governor, Yannis Tornaros, was a finance minister under the previous government of Samaras's government, one could say it was a political partisan statement, but ultimately Yannis Tornaros is also respected more as a technocrat. His origins lie in the center-left and not in the center-right. So I think a statement from him, for not only just for Greeks, but for the international community, represents a voice of reason coming from within Greece.
So still no deal. What are the sticking points that's stopping the EU on the one hand and Greece on the other from agreeing a deal?
From the EU perspective, you have to say it's because it's European Central Bank, IMF, and European Commission. So one has to think in terms of three entities. There was a lot of debate in previous months between the European Commission and the IMF. The European Commission wanted to take more of it, a less aggressive stance towards Greece. The IMF was taking more of a stricter line. Finally, in early June of 2015, Merkel brought them all together into one meeting, the heads of the various of the Troika, together with the President Hollande of France, to come together on a common position. So I would say within the European, with the Troika position, there are no more sticking points, at least for now. They have a common position. For the Tsipras government, obviously it's things like the increase in VATs and particularly the pensions issue. His desire not to cut pensions, because he came to office on an anti-austerity measure on a platform, and on part of that anti-austerity platform, pensions is something that's very, very sacred, and that also threatens his own coalition with the far left element threatening to break off, to cause problems for him. And obviously, as a politician, it's political survival. He wants a deal. Tsipras wants a deal. The problem is, does he have enough leverage within his own coalition to get one going?
Yeah, so who do you say is to blame? It's quite hard to apportion blame from looking at this outside, but there's the potential obviously for protests within Greece itself if this doesn't happen. But for the rest of the world, I mean, the EU and the whole Eurozone is under threat if a deal isn't reached. Which side? Is there a side that isn't being sort of reasonable with their demands?
If we go back 2 years ago when this crisis first began, 2008, 9, 10, there's enough blame to apportion to both sides. A lot of irresponsible decisions were made. But if one comes to more in the immediate history, the last 5 months since the Tsipras government came to power and won the elections in late 2015, it came to office with, you would say, a decent amount of sympathizers at the European level. If you look at someone, particularly the French finance minister, was very much sympathetic towards Syriza government. But what happened is that in the past 5 months, this government, the end result is that this government has managed to burn all its bridges with anyone who sympathized with them. So if one looks at it within that context, a lot of blame in recent months, in the immediate recent months, goes to the Syriza government. But this is an issue that goes back years.
You've been in Greece recently. What's the appetite there amongst people in the country? Obviously, we've seen protests in the past. What's the appetite there to take on more taxes, to take on higher VAT? Is there any sense that they'd be willing to do that? Or, obviously they elected this anti-austerity government. Have they had enough with austerity
now? I think there's been absorption capacity in terms of austerity. They've hit their limit, if you ask any ordinary citizens. If you can present to them a deal that's convincing that austerity or certain austerity measures, but you present a vision, a long-term, there's going to be light at the end of the tunnel, I think the people would be much more, compelled to participate in other measures. But I think at the end of the day, when you first arrive there, everything on the surface seems to be normal. The summer is setting in. There's a sense of ease. But once you begin speaking to people, you sense immediately that there is concern, fear of unpredictability about the future. And particularly if you're involved in business, there's a sense of paralysis for the last 6 months. Is that anything you try to do, it does not moving. It's all paralyzed because of that unpredictable factor.
So it's about 12 days until this next repayment is due in. If Greece defaults on the IMF and the ECB repayments, what do you think will happen? Do you think they'll be forced to leave the EU, or do you think some kind of deal or agreement will be struck which will let them stay?
On Thursday, tomorrow, there's going to be an important meeting of the finance ministers, but it doesn't look like anything is going to get accomplished there. The emergency meeting of the European heads of state may be called this coming Sunday, June 21st, and it's there that Tsipras wants to strike a deal at the highest levels of Europe and not with the technocrats. If a deal they can reach a deal there, and then it begins to facilitate the process. But one has to ask again, the key date is being June 30th. If nothing is reached by June 21st, and the June 30th date hits, that'll be technically the European Central Bank has a discretion to declare Greece bankrupt. But the main date is for the European Central Bank is going to be July 20th, when it's owed 3.5 billion euros. And if that money doesn't come in, Greece is technically out of Europe. But on the June 30th date, when the 1.5 billion is owed to the IMF, if that money is not given, there can still be triggering a 2-month grace period. There's still more playtime with that. But when it comes to the European Central Bank, very difficult. July 20th is, I would say, the deadline date, but it can come close.
And you were speaking to Greeks when you were in the country, and they were obviously very worried about the uncertainty about all of this. But what about the Eurozone itself? What happens if Greece leaves? Can it recover?
Economically, in the long term, I would say yes, it can recover, but the amount of damage to its reputation on the international markets will be considerable for the foreseeable future. Can they recover from reputation damage? That's a big question mark. But I think ultimately it will manage to recover in the long term. But between now and then, there'll be a lot of damage, reputation to the European Union's credibility, to the damage, and some may even go to the point of saying it may put the entire European project at risk. That's in the most extreme, worst case scenario.
Yeah, a lot of uncertainty, Marco. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. We'll no doubt be talking about this at a later date. Thanks.